What if the first spark of human spirituality was not born in temples, rituals, or ancient stories, but in a single terrifying moment when our earliest ancestors felt watched by something they could not see? Imagine standing in the middle of the African savanna 3.1 million years ago, with no tools, no fire, no language, only instinct, and suddenly sensing a presence behind you. Was it a predator, the wind, or something deeper, something that early humans might have interpreted as a force beyond the physical world? This question shapes the foundation of our journey into the origins of the supernatural fear and protection that would accompany humanity for millions of years. Before religions, myths, gods, and symbols, the first humans lived surrounded by vast darkness and uncertainty. Nightfall was not just the absence of light, it was the entrance to an invisible realm where danger hid in every shadow. In these early conditions, fear was not only a survival mechanism, but the doorway to the birth of the spiritual mind. When a branch snapped in the distance, or a sudden gust of wind touched the skin, the mind of Australopithecus instinctively searched for meaning. This urge to interpret the unknown is one of the earliest seeds of belief, a desperate attempt to understand forces that shaped life long before science or storytelling existed. These primal moments created the emotional landscape where spirituality could begin. Curiosity mixed with fear, vulnerability blended with imagination, and the unseen slowly transformed into something intentional. Our ancestors did not have the words to describe these sensations, but they felt them deeply, carving the first invisible paths that later civilizations would follow. The question is, how did these sensations evolve into the idea of supernatural protection, the belief that something beyond the physical world could guard them in moments of danger? You have probably felt something similar at least once in your life. A sudden silence or a strange intuition that made you look over your shoulder without knowing why. These ancient echoes still live in us. If this resonates with you, tell me your experience in the comments and let me know how you interpret moments like this. Your perspective helps deepen this exploration. So leave a comment, check if you are already subscribed, and make sure to like the video so this story reaches more people who enjoy understanding our origins. What comes next may surprise you, and it connects directly to the world these early humans faced, where survival meant confronting both the visible and the invisible forces around them. To understand why our ancestors turned to the supernatural for protection, we must enter the world they inhabited 3.1 million years ago, a world far more hostile than anything we can imagine today. Life was not simply difficult, it was a constant negotiation with death. Every sound carried a threat, every shadow suggested a predator, and every open plain exposed their vulnerability. Early humans lived without fire, without tools strong enough to defend themselves, and without social structures that offered true safety. In this environment, surviving a single day required an extraordinary sensitivity to danger, and this sensitivity created the perfect conditions for spiritual thought to emerge. The landscape around them was alive with movement and noise. Thunder shook the ground with a force that must have felt supernatural. Lightning split the sky in ways that seemed like messages from an invisible realm. The cries of predators echoed across the savanna, rolling through the darkness long before their bodies came into view. Windstorms could distort the environment in seconds, turning familiar spaces into unpredictable territory. For early humans, these phenomena were not abstract. They were immediate, personal, and deeply emotional experiences that demanded interpretation. Because they had no scientific understanding of nature, the unknown became a presence. Danger had intention. Storms felt like they targeted the vulnerable. Predators seemed to appear out of nowhere, guided by some unseen force. This is where the beginnings of belief took root. To the early human mind, it was natural to assume that powerful, invisible forces governed the world around them. The sense of being exposed created a psychological need to seek meaning, to assign motives to the events that threatened their survival. This environment shaped their perception. A rustle in the tall grass was not just a sound, but a warning delivered by something more than chance. The sudden silence of the night was not merely quietness, but a signal that something was present, observing. As fear sharpened their senses, the boundary between physical danger and imagined presence became increasingly thin. This blending of instinct and interpretation formed the earliest framework for supernatural thought, a way for the human mind to create order in a world that offered none. As generations passed, these patterns became part of collective experience. The instinct to look beyond the visible world was quietly transmitted through behavior, reactions, and the emotional memory of previous encounters with danger. Before any ritual, symbol, or myth existed, the foundation of spirituality was already being constructed by the relationship between the fragile human body and the overwhelming forces surrounding it. And it is within this fragile balance between survival and imagination that we begin to see the first traces of the supernatural taking shape, shaping beliefs long before humans had words to describe what they felt. As early humans navigated their unforgiving environment, the ordinary sounds and movements of nature became charged with extraordinary significance. Every rustling bush, distant roar, or flicker of shadow was more than just a sensory event. It was a signal, a message from forces beyond comprehension. Without the ability to analyze these occurrences scientifically, our ancestors naturally anthropomorphized them, attributing intention, intelligence, and sometimes malevolence to what they could not see. The concept of invisible forces began to take root, forming the earliest foundations of what we now recognize as spirituality. This was not conscious religion, but a primal recognition that the world contained powers that demanded respect, attention, and sometimes ritualistic acknowledgement. Imagine walking through the tall grasses of the savannah, the horizon hazy with dust and sunlight. A shadow passes overhead. Was it the wind, a predator, or a spirit of the unseen world? The mind, seeking order in chaos, interprets, predicts, and reacts. Early humans developed an acute sensitivity to patterns, even where none objectively existed. This hyper-awareness served survival purposes but also fostered a sense of the sacred. Sounds of the night, the whispering of leaves, and the cracking of branches were transformed from mere environmental feedback into a language of potential threats and protective forces. By interpreting these cues as signs of invisible agents, humans began to build a cognitive bridge between the tangible world and the unseen, a bridge that would grow more elaborate with time. The process was iterative and cumulative. Each encounter with danger or uncertainty reinforced the notion that there were entities, forces, or spirits that could influence human life. Fear, necessity, and imagination intertwined, creating a fertile ground for the evolution of ritual behavior. Gestures, body movements, and even vocalizations may have originated as early attempts to communicate with these perceived entities, offering appeasement or seeking guidance. Over countless generations, these behaviors solidified into proto-rituals, forming a feedback loop in which the environment and the human mind co-created a sense of spiritual reality. This stage in human cognition illustrates the subtle yet profound emergence of symbolic thought. Even without tangible artifacts or verbal storytelling, the mind began to encode experiences as meaningful, intentional, and morally significant. The very act of surviving became intertwined with the belief in unseen protective forces, sowing the seeds for a spiritual framework that would persist and evolve. What sounds like simple instinct was actually the early architecture of belief, where perception, fear, and imagination converged to produce the first concepts of the sacred. As our ancestors became more attuned to the hidden rhythms of their environment, subtle sensations began to shape their inner world. The flicker of a shadow, the sudden rustle of grass, or the inexplicable chill in the air created an awareness of presence beyond the physical. These experiences, fleeting yet profound, gave rise to the first inklings of spiritual perception. Early humans did not have words for what they felt, but their minds instinctively recognized patterns, intentions, and forces that transcended immediate survival. It was in this space between instinct and imagination that the first notion of invisible protectors emerged, shaping behavior, emotion, and cognition in ways that would echo across millennia. This perception of unseen guardians was not uniform. It evolved differently depending on environment, experience, and the intensity of daily threats. In areas with frequent predator attacks, humans may have felt a stronger sense of being watched, guided, or protected. Conversely, in regions of relative safety, these sensations might have been more subtle, fostering curiosity rather than fear. What unified these experiences was a common drive, the need to make sense of danger, to seek control over the uncontrollable, and to create mental frameworks that allowed humans to anticipate, react, and survive. This emerging spiritual awareness was deeply tied to the body, as the earliest humans responded with heightened senses, rapid heartbeat, and instinctive movements, all physiological feedback reinforcing the sense of invisible presence. These sensations also influenced social cohesion. Groups that shared interpretations of the invisible, whether protective spirits, presences, or unseen forces, developed shared behaviors and rituals, reinforcing bonds and survival strategies. The recognition of something greater than themselves became a shared cognitive and emotional experience, a bridge between individual perception and collective belief. Even simple gestures, protective postures, or coordinated movements could have been early forms of ritual, representing an attempt to communicate with or honor these perceived forces. Over generations, these actions became ingrained, forming the backbone of communal spiritual awareness that predated formalized religion or mythology. Reflecting on these moments, we can see the first glimmers of the sacred emerging from the interplay between fear, awareness, and imagination. It was a dynamic, evolving system where invisible forces, whether real or perceived, shaped thought, decision-making, and survival. For the earliest humans, understanding the unseen was not optional, it was necessary. This is why spiritual awareness became a cornerstone of human development, embedding the notion that protection, guidance, and influence could originate from beyond the visible world. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt a presence or a sense of protection that you couldn't explain? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your perspective matters and adds depth to this journey into our ancestral mind. Focusing on your thoughts not only connects us but helps us understand the importance of these earliest forms of spirituality. Fear, one of the most primal emotions, played a central role in shaping the earliest human behaviors and beliefs. It was not merely a response to predators or environmental hazards. It was a cognitive tool that heightened awareness, sharpened instincts, and guided decision-making in an unpredictable world. The mind of a human living 3.1 million years ago was constantly processing signals from the environment, snapping twigs, distant roars, the shifting patterns of light and shadow. Each stimulus carried the potential for danger, and the interpretation of these signals often extended beyond the physical realm. The invisible forces imagined by our ancestors were not abstract fantasies. They were practical, extensions of their survival strategy, a way to anticipate threats that could not yet be fully understood. This heightened state of perception led to the creation of early rituals and protective behaviors. A simple gesture, like raising the hands toward a perceived presence or moving cautiously through the landscape, was an attempt to influence forces beyond immediate comprehension. Over time, repeated actions in response to unseen threats became ingrained, forming the first proto-rituals. These behaviors were not uniform. They varied according to environmental pressures, individual experiences, and the cognitive capabilities of each group. What remained constant was the interplay between fear and imagination, which allowed humans to generate a sense of agency in a world dominated by uncertainty. The power of these early rituals lay in their ability to unify the group. Shared interpretations of danger and invisible protection created collective behaviors that enhanced survival. When individuals within a community acted according to the perceived guidance of unseen forces, they reinforced group cohesion, strengthened communication, and increased the chances of responding successfully to threats. This early form of social coordination, mediated by the perception of spiritual forces, laid the groundwork for the development of symbolic thought. By attributing meaning to the invisible, humans began to structure their experiences, encode memory, and transmit knowledge across generations in ways that went far beyond mere instinct. Moreover, these fear-driven behaviors were adaptive in multiple dimensions. They encouraged caution, promoted awareness of subtle environmental cues, and cultivated mental flexibility. The mind became adept at pattern recognition, at discerning intentionality in the movements of predators, storms, or other humans. At the same time, imagination allowed for the conceptualization of invisible protectors or supernatural allies, offering psychological comfort and a sense of guidance. In this context, fear was not just an emotion. It was the engine driving early spiritual cognition, the catalyst for ritualized action, and the invisible scaffold upon which belief systems would slowly emerge. Through this lens, we can see that the earliest humans were not passive observers of their environment, but active interpreters, constantly seeking ways to understand, predict, and influence the world around them. Their rituals, gestures, and imaginative constructs were direct responses to the interplay between fear and necessity, forming the foundation for the spiritual awareness that would evolve over millions of years. As our ancestors sought to exert influence over the unpredictable forces around them, they began to incorporate objects, marks, and gestures into their interactions with the unseen. Small stones arranged in patterns, scratches on tree bark, or deliberate placements of animal bones may have served as the earliest symbolic attempts to communicate with forces beyond perception. These proto-amulets were not mere decoration. They were tangible extensions of human cognition, externalizing intention and creating a physical representation of protection. Each mark, each carefully chosen object, held potential meaning, acting as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual, between what was visible and what was imagined. Gestures and movements also became critical components of early spiritual behavior. A raised arm, a rhythmic stomp, or a deliberate motion of the hands could signify acknowledgement, supplication, or deterrence. These acts were reinforced by observation and imitation, becoming standardized over time within groups. The repetition of these gestures provided structure to experiences that were otherwise chaotic and dangerous. Even without language, humans were developing a form of symbolic expression, a way to encode intent and communicate with forces that could not be directly observed. This early form of symbolism reflects an essential aspect of cognitive evolution, the ability to assign meaning and purpose to the intangible. The use of objects and gestures also enhanced memory and social cohesion. When a group collectively repeated a gesture or positioned an object in a particular way, the action became part of a shared understanding, reinforcing social bonds and communal knowledge. These practices provided reassurance, allowing early humans to navigate uncertainty with a sense of agency. The physicality of these proto-rituals anchored abstract ideas into the real world, making them more understandable and actionable. In essence, these early humans were beginning to externalize their spiritual reasoning, creating visible manifestations of invisible protection. Through these behaviors, early humans laid the groundwork for more complex ritual systems and symbolic thought. The interplay between physical objects, gestures, and the perception of unseen forces fostered an environment where imagination could thrive. Symbolic reasoning, born from survival needs, became the foundation upon which spiritual systems and belief structures would eventually be built. Each careful placement of a stone, each deliberate motion of the body, was a step toward codifying the invisible into recognizable forms, an evolution of cognition that allowed humans to interact with both the material and the immaterial worlds simultaneously. By understanding these early practices, we gain insight into the origins of spiritual behavior and symbolic thought. What began as instinctive reactions to danger evolved into deliberate acts of meaning-making, laying the invisible foundations for future religious and cultural systems. These proto-amulets and gestures were not just survival tools. They were the first language of the sacred, the earliest attempts to shape and protect existence in a world that was as mysterious as it was perilous. As early humans continued to interpret the unseen, a new concept began to emerge: the notion of protective entities or ancestral spirits. These were not gods in the formal sense, nor were they beings with defined personalities or domains, but rather conceptual forces that could influence survival and well-being. When a sudden danger appeared or an unexpected event occurred, the human mind sought explanations beyond the physical, projecting intention and awareness onto invisible agents. These proto-entities became mental scaffolds, a framework through which early humans could navigate the unpredictable world, giving structure to fear, hope, and instinct. Over time, this sense of invisible protection shaped not only cognition, but behavior. Groups began to perform collective actions that acknowledged these unseen forces, reinforcing the idea that certain entities could guard, guide, or intervene. Repeated patterns of movement, vocalizations, and the careful arrangement of objects reinforced the presence of these forces in everyday life. Even without a formal language, the understanding that protection could be sought from the invisible became a shared social reality. These experiences laid the groundwork for more complex spiritual and ritual structures, where intention, belief, and communal practice intersected to form the earliest expressions of faith. The belief in protective forces also served psychological and evolutionary functions. It offered reassurance in a world filled with danger, reduced anxiety, and increased the likelihood of cooperative behavior. Early humans who attributed guidance or protection to unseen entities were better able to anticipate threats, make cautious decisions, and support each other through coordinated actions. In this sense, the first spiritual concepts were adaptive, intertwining survival with cognition and social cohesion. The mind's ability to conceptualize protection beyond the immediate physical reality reflects the remarkable evolutionary sophistication of early human thought. As these protective entities became central to the mental landscape, the distinction between the natural and the supernatural began to blur. Humans understood that not all threats were visible, and not all guidance came from immediate, tangible sources. The invisible became as real as the tangible, influencing decisions, behaviors, and social structures. The seeds of ritual, reverence, and early spiritual systems were sown in these experiences, carried forward across generations by imitation, observation, and emotional resonance. This invisible network of belief would eventually evolve into the complex mythologies, deities, and sacred symbols known to later humans. I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt a sense of guidance or protection that you couldn't explain? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your reflections deepen this journey into our ancestors' spiritual minds and help us understand how the earliest forms of belief shaped humanity. Discussing these experiences connects us and offers insight into the origins of faith in the unseen. So take a moment to comment and contribute to this exploration. As human cognition evolved, the brain of early humans became increasingly adept at identifying patterns, assigning meaning, and predicting outcomes in the natural world. This cognitive flexibility allowed for the emergence of symbolic thought, the ability to interpret events not only as physical occurrences, but as signs imbued with intention. The perception of unseen forces was no longer purely reactive, it became proactive. Early humans began to anticipate dangers and opportunities, imagining invisible agents that could influence outcomes in ways that were difficult to predict. This imaginative capacity was critical as it allowed humans to create mental models of protection and guidance, shaping their understanding of both the environment and the forces they believed influenced it. The interplay between observation and imagination strengthened the development of early spiritual cognition. When patterns emerged, such as seasonal changes, animal migrations, or recurrent dangers, the human mind began to associate them with unseen principles or protective forces. This was not abstract thinking in the modern sense, but a foundational form of reasoning that linked cause and effect with intention. By interpreting natural phenomena as messages or interventions from invisible entities, early humans developed a framework for decision-making that extended beyond immediate survival. These interpretations formed the cognitive roots of ritual, belief, and the nascent sense of morality tied to spiritual awareness. Memory and social learning further reinforce these emerging spiritual frameworks. Individuals who survived encounters with danger often conveyed their understanding to the group through gestures, sounds, or demonstrations. Over time, these shared experiences created a collective knowledge base, allowing subsequent generations to anticipate risks and respond strategically. The perceived involvement of unseen forces in these experiences elevated their importance, embedding spiritual concepts deeply into the mental and social structures of the group. Even without formalized rituals, the anticipation of protection or guidance from invisible agents became a persistent theme in early human cognition. Through this process, the human mind began to construct elaborate, mental representations of the supernatural. These early frameworks were highly adaptive, providing not only psychological comfort but also practical benefits for survival. By treating the environment as a network of visible and invisible influences, early humans could navigate complexity with greater skill. The notion that unseen forces could guide, protect, or punish became central to their reasoning, laying the groundwork for the development of complex mythologies, sacred symbols, and structured religious systems. This emergent spiritual intelligence demonstrates the profound connection between cognition, imagination, and survival, highlighting how the perception of the unseen shaped the trajectory of human evolution. As early humans' cognitive abilities and symbolic reasoning matured, they began to encode their experiences into stories and oral traditions. Without written language, storytelling became the primary vehicle for transmitting knowledge, fears, and beliefs across generations. These narratives served multiple purposes. They preserved lessons learned from encounters with predators or natural disasters, reinforced social cohesion by creating shared understanding, and maintained the memory of invisible forces believed to influence life. Each story carried not only information about survival, but also implicit guidance on interacting with unseen entities, instilling the earliest concepts of the sacred and protective powers. These oral traditions were more than mere entertainment. They were cognitive scaffolds that allowed early humans to structure their understanding of the world. Patterns in nature, recurring threats, and the seemingly inexplicable were woven into narratives that combined fact, observation, and imaginative interpretation. By assigning meaning to events and imbuing them with intention, early humans could anticipate dangers and recognize opportunities in ways that purely instinctual behavior could not provide. This process transformed raw experience into cultural memory, where the lessons of the past guided decisions in the present, and the influence of invisible forces became a central theme in collective cognition. The stories likely included ritualistic elements, demonstrating how early humans sought to influence or appease the unseen. Vocalizations, chants, gestures, and symbolic markings may have been incorporated into the storytelling process, reinforcing the perception of protection and guidance. These shared practices strengthened social bonds and enhanced cooperation, providing adaptive advantages for survival. Narratives encoded moral and practical lessons simultaneously, showing how interaction with the invisible was intertwined with behavior, ethics, and community norms. In this way, the first human stories were both functional and spiritual, shaping early cognition, social structure, and the perception of the sacred. Transmission of these oral narratives was dynamic, adapting as groups migrated, environments changed, or new experiences arose. Knowledge of invisible protectors, rituals, and the consequences of disregarding perceived forces became part of the collective cultural consciousness. Even without formalized religious systems, these stories created a framework for understanding the sacred, the unknown, and the protective mechanisms that governed survival. They established the foundation for codified beliefs, ritual practices, and the early formation of mythology that would later define human civilizations. Through storytelling, the abstract became tangible, the unseen acquired influence, and the earliest spiritual traditions took root in the shared imagination of humanity. By the time humans had mastered the art of storytelling, symbolism, and ritualized behavior, the concept of the sacred had already taken root in the minds of early societies. The invisible forces our ancestors perceived were no longer fleeting sensations. They became guiding principles that influenced decisions, behaviors, and social interactions. These early spiritual constructs created a framework for understanding the world, allowing humans to navigate uncertainty with a sense of agency and collective purpose. Every gesture, every object, and every narrative reinforced the presence of forces that were simultaneously protective and instructive, shaping the evolution of cognition and social cohesion. As symbolic thought and communication evolved, these concepts became increasingly sophisticated. Rituals, vocalizations, and patterns of behavior began to standardize within groups, creating shared experiences that transcended individual perception. The notion that certain actions could influence unseen forces encouraged cooperation, trust, and collective problem-solving. Early humans were effectively building the first cognitive architecture for faith, morality, and social regulation. This architecture did not depend on formalized theology or organized religion. It was grounded in experience, imagination, and the universal need to make sense of a world full of both visible and invisible threats. The cumulative effect of these developments was profound. By interpreting the unseen as influential and protective, humans created mental models that guided behavior across generations. These models laid the foundation for later mythologies, religious systems, and cultural norms that defined human societies for millennia. The interplay between fear, observation, imagination, and narrative formed a robust framework through which our ancestors could navigate the unknown, instilling a sense of order and security where none existed before. Their practices, whether marking the landscape, performing gestures, or recounting stories, encoded lessons that would resonate far beyond their immediate environment. If you've stayed with me this far, take a moment to reflect on how these early insights into the unseen shaped humanity. I invite you to leave a comment, sharing what struck you most about the origins of faith and protection, and how it resonates with your understanding of human nature. Don't forget to like the video if you found this exploration meaningful, and check that you're subscribed so you can continue following these journeys into our past. There's more to discover about how these ancient perceptions influenced civilizations, and I have a video here that continues this story. Click and continue exploring with me to see how the sacred evolved through human history.